Survivors of abuse often take a long time to come forward and disclose what's happened to them. That's very understandable. The problem is that in law, both in England and Scotland, we do have time limits for bringing cases. In England, fortunately, the court does have the power to set aside those time limits and allow survivors of abuse to bring cases sometimes many years after the event. In Scotland, the law has been much harsher and the courts have been very reluctant to set aside the time bar so that survivors of abuse can bring cases many years after the abuse happens. So there's been a lot of concern in Scotland that survivors of abuse are being treated unfairly. That's led to some campaigning, and the Scottish Parliament has now recognised that the way in which the time bar has worked in Scotland has been very unfair for survivors of abuse, and has said that it's now going to change the law. If the time bar is removed in Scotland, then I think it's going to be easier for survivors of abuse to bring cases in the courts in Scotland, and that's obviously very important. It's important that survivors of abuse are able to get justice. They haven't had that opportunity and they haven't been able to do that in Scotland in the past few years. I think taking away the time bar, which is something that's not only happening in Scotland, it's happened in other countries around the world, is an important step forward that will enable survivors of abuse to bring cases where they weren't necessarily able to do that before. It's completely unfair that just because somebody lives in Scotland, they don't have the opportunity to bring a case, whereas they might have that opportunity in England. So the law, I think we're confident, is going to change in Scotland, and when it does change, that will give survivors of abuse in Scotland the opportunity to bring cases that they weren't able to bring in the past.